Welcome to the Regent University School of Law podcast. My name is Caleb Pierce, and I am a third year law student here at Regent University, where I have the privilege of serving as the symposium editor of the Law Review and as the vice president of the Regent chapter of the Federalist Society. I'm here today with Jim Mason, president of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, an alumnus of Regent Law from the class of 1996. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, let's start by talking about you for a minute. Would you briefly tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I am a homeschool dad. My wife is Debbie. We have 7 children. They're all grown now. Our youngest is an underclassman at Grove City College in Pennsylvania. Our oldest child is the strength and conditioning coach at Laterno University, which is a Christian school in Texas, and various things in between. Debbie homeschooled all 7 of our kids, kind of right straight through from start to finish. Um, and that homeschooling is sort of my entry point into law school, and especially here at Regent University School of Law. Back when we first started having kids, I was a parole and probation officer, and Debbie had always wanted to homeschool, and so we were preparing to homeschool our oldest child when the Lord kind of intervened in my life, and it became clear to both of us that we should change course. We moved from Oregon with 3 kids to start law school here almost exactly 30 years ago. We started in I think the end of August of 1993, and when we arrived, we had a house not far from the school, um, and I was totally wrapped up in trying to figure out, I mean, I'd been out of school for a while, if you couldn't guess that, and so trying to get off on a good start, and then a hurricane was bearing down on Virginia Beach, and this was the famous 1993 fall hurricane where Pat Robertson actually prayed it away. But in the meantime, Debbie was at our house, taping up all the windows against the hurricane, while I was out here, having a lot of fun being returning to school after many years.
Wow. So why did you choose Regent Law?
Well, so I was in the United States Navy, and I stayed in the reserves after my active duty period. And after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, I was recalled to active duty. Went over to the Middle East for a period of time. Traveled all over the Middle East in my capacity I was a naval liaison officer. Pretty cool stuff. And when I came back, it seemed to me that the Lord was sort of stirring me to do something bigger. And my job as a parole and probation officer, I got to counsel people a lot, and that's a part of the job that I really liked a lot. Um, and so I thought, well, maybe I should go back to school to be a Christian counselor. And when I did research, I found, half a dozen Christian schools that had offered advanced degrees in Christian counseling, one of them being Regent. And as I was scrolling through the microfiche, trying to find the counseling program in the Regent catalog at our local library, as I was scrolling through, it flashed in front of my eyes that there was a law school at Regent, and that just seemed like kind of a weird thing that there would be a law school in a Christian college. So I never scrolled all the way to the counseling part. I got stuck at the law school, and eventually Debbie became persuaded also, and we moved our family from Oregon to Virginia Beach to start law school 30 years ago.
So, what was that process like going through law school with a young family, homeschooling your children? How did you make that work and take that process through law school?
So for me, I once it became clear to me that I wanted to, get a degree, an advanced degree, and that law school was it. The more I looked into Regent, and we actually came out for a fall preview visit where Debbie and I both got to come. Um, I never applied to another law school. I had a pretty good LSAT score. I could have applied to any number of schools, but it was the commitment of Regent Law School to teach law from a biblical perspective, by Christians for Christians. There was an additional commitment that the professors that we met in our visits and soon came to find out they really care about teaching, they care about their students. Um, we were older, we had 3 kids when we started, and at the time, Regent was only a postgraduate school. There was no undergraduate. So there were lots of older students here already, both in the law school and the School of Divinity. And so there was a real strong family community for my family, which was important to me. Any number of places you could go, you might have good professors, but the community would be kind of up in the air. So um, when we came, we just, it was seamless. Our 3 kids and Debbie, found other homeschooling families and um, just the sense of community. There still is a Law Wives. Um, I don't know if it's a club or it's a group anyway. And so Debbie, hooked up with that and got to know some of the professors' wives and other law student wives. And um, she ended up being the president of that before she left as well. And so it was just, a commitment to our family and to, just learning how to do the law, practice the law from a Christian perspective was, I don't know that there was any place at the time other than this that I would have wanted to go.
Certainly. So you and your family were obviously very involved in the community here. What's one of your favorite memories from your time here at Regent Law as a student?
Um, well, so I wished I'd brought it. um, we had a kind of a student newspaper, and I don't remember what it was called. And one day we were with a family having a picnic between the law library and the old administration building here on campus. And our kids got in a fight over a stick that they picked up. And so they dragged it home and then they got into another fight. So I wrote up a, uh, a case from the Supreme Court of the Mason family of how to legally dispose of that wild stick. And they published it in our paper, and I still have copies of it. It was just a lot of fun to kind of, studying the law was fun, playing with the law. When you're a law student, you get to play with the law. And it's sort of so that represented for me the playfulness that we could have here. And I tried to kind of keep that, spirit of playfulness even in my, more serious law practice.
Yeah, that's great that you had the opportunity to really integrate your family into your studies here in law school. And family is obviously something that's very important to you, as is homeschooling. Was homeschooling always a passion of yours? And how did you uh, kind of move into the role of working in the legal practice revolving around homeschooling?
So homeschooling was not something that I was aware of or familiar with until after Debbie and I became engaged. And through our premarital counseling, you sort through different expectations. And one of her, I say expectation, but it was actually kind of more of a command, was when we have kids, we're going to homeschool them. And I only exaggerate a little bit. She was pretty sold out on it. And I'd never really heard of it or knew anybody who homeschooled, didn't know it was a thing. So I had to do some investigation. When we were engaged, I could easily agree to it because it seemed like it was maybe a deal breaker. But then we had a kid, and then the kid got older, and eventually I had to actually address whether homeschooling would be okay or not. And so I did a lot of research when our oldest child was about 3 and came to conclude that it was a really good option for us. And then I started reading reports from HSLDA about cases around the country. And in those days, there was a lot more resistance, official resistance of homeschooling. And that really, really, fired me up, I guess you'd say. And so when it came time to think about going to law school, I had always had an ambition to get into that area and work with HSLDA. It took a while, but eventually, 22 years ago, um, I was hired there, and I've worked there since 2001.
For those who aren't familiar with HSLDA, can you explain a little bit about the work that the organization does and then the work that you do as president?
So HSLDA stands for Homeschool Legal Defense Association. It was founded 40 years ago. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary, so 1983. And that was kind of an offshoot of the early days of homeschooling, especially among Christian parents who were motivated by their sincere religious belief that they were charged with raising and nurturing and educating their own children. So, two lawyers on the West Coast, both. There's a famous story that, in homeschooling lore, where uh, Dr. James Dobson, on one of his Focus on the Family radio interviews, interviewed Dr. Raymond Moore, who was one of the very earliest proponents of homeschooling. And both of our founders, Mike Ferris and Mike Smith, heard that broadcast, and it was, rebroadcast periodically. So I don't know if they heard it at the same time, but they both felt convicted. They both went home, and together with their wives decided to homeschool their children, who had, one was in a Christian school, one had their kids in public school, I think. And they decided to homeschool. And that was in the days when there were lots of legal challenges to the rights of people to homeschool. One was in California, one was in Washington. Once it became known that there were these pretty accomplished lawyers who were, homeschooling their own children, they started getting lots of calls. And Mike Ferris, our co-founder with Mike Smith, is nothing if not entrepreneurial, and he's a world-class builder of institutions. So he got this idea that if there's going to be challenges to homeschooling all over the country, if we don't stand together, we're going to get picked off one by one. And so he formed HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, on the premise that homeschooling families banding together, we can then send resources to where the fight is. And so that's what they did in 1983. I've seen our first year membership rolls. It's handwritten on one side of a yellow legal sized pad. And now today we have over 100,000 member families, all for the same purpose. By banding together, we can move legislation in the right direction. We can defend families who are being challenged. We can provide many, many resources. We have a lot of connections with homeschooling groups all over the country and the state and local level. Our mission is to make homeschooling possible for anybody who wants to do it. We're motivated by our Christian beliefs. We're a Christian organization, but we work to make homeschooling possible and homeschooling free for anyone who wants to undertake it, whether you agree with us about fundamental things or not. Um, and a big reason for that is, we see homeschooling as a way of transmitting our faith to our own children, and we want to spread that blessing to as many people who will take it up. And a lot of people start homeschooling for a variety of reasons. Maybe their kids aren't doing, or maybe they're being bullied, or they're not doing well, or they start homeschooling, they get involved with homeschooling, they start seeing the blessings of homeschooling, and so it's a huge opportunity for Christians to influence the culture.
Yeah, and as someone who's homeschooled myself, I really appreciate the work that HSLDA does. I remember growing up, my family used to have the little magnet on the fridge with the contact information for HSLDA, and really appreciate the work that you all do. But for those who maybe weren't homeschooled, aren't homeschooling, aren't at all connected to someone who is homeschooling, how would you explain the importance of ensuring that there is that freedom for individuals to be able to homeschool? Because you mentioned earlier that when you first became involved with homeschooling, uh, there were some issues with how much freedom there was to homeschool, and we've certainly seen an expanse of those freedoms. But for those who aren't involved with the homeschool movement, how would you explain to them the importance of ensuring that freedom for others?
Yeah, so there's a big picture element to that, and then a more precise for homeschooling. Education in America used to be local, used to be parent directed, used to be not compulsory. And then in the first progressive era, the late end of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, in the early days of the progressive movement, the the trend was, or the thought was, we can't leave people to their own devices. Government has to take over large swaths of society to ensure that everybody gets treated well. And that's sort of how compulsory education laws came into existence. Um, and compulsory education and public education became the norm. There was always just a little slice for private schools. Um, what homeschoolers did, uh, starting small in the late 70s and then gradually growing, we wrested control of education away from the government completely. There's still regulations and the like, but we created an island of liberty in a sea of otherwise, compulsory education. And that just changed the world of education enormously, where lots of new ideas, lots of entrepreneurial things can happen. Families aren't, constrained to just one way of getting their kids educated. They created all manner of associations. De Tocqueville, when he toured America in the early 19th century, he said something along the lines of, in England, an undertaking usually requires a great lord. In France, it's a government that's in charge of great undertakings. But in America, it's private associations, people freely joining together to achieve a common end. And that's what homeschooling really harkened back to. It Nobody made us do it. Nobody funded us to do it. Nobody nobody tells us how to do it. But organically, we formed this huge kind of culture that's separate from um, the predominant culture, and that's yielded all kinds of great benefits. Um, Independent-minded people, people that are better able to critically think, people who aren't kind of beholden to the government. There's just a lot of great benefits to the country for having a liberty-minded, independent thing called homeschooling, and then for individual families, it's a great oasis for many many families. A lot of families can do well with their kids in public school or in private school, but for some, especially during and since COVID, many have discovered that it's just better for their kids.
As someone who has been litigating and advocating these issues for decades, what would you say is the current challenge that the homeschool movement faces, and the largest issues that revolve not only around homeschooling but education freedom in general?
Yeah. So in the early days, there was a very clear, contest between, is it legal or is it not? Many states it was clearly illegal to homeschool. Many other states thought incorrectly that it was illegal, and many court cases, and years of litigation reversed that misunderstanding in those states. And then the rest of the states, homeschooling was just kind of disfavored, or it's unheard of, it's uncommon, and so over time, each of 50 states, I think one of your Regent Law um, trustees or advisor, somebody is Judge Sutton from the Sixth Circuit, and he wrote a book called The 50 State Solution. So homeschooling was a 50-state solution because education law is generally a state-based thing, and so state by state by state, the barriers rolled back, and eventually, what COVID changed probably more than anything is, before COVID, there were lots of people who kind of knew about homeschooling but would never consider it. But during COVID, everybody got a taste of having their kids at home and working from home and seeing what's really happening in their kids' schools. And um, post COVID, there's a lot less reluctance on the part of many people who would never have considered to homeschool. So it's a mainstream option for a much bigger swath of American society today. and that's a great opportunity. Um, but it also presents some challenges because the boundaries of educational freedom are at about their outermost limit. There's a few states that are still kind of holdouts, but so there's really kind of only one direction to go, and that's backwards. Um, so we're seeing a lot more attention by popular culture figures like the Washington Post has done a series of articles. Amazon did uh, a series or a docu series about the Duggar family, and just this past Sunday, as we sit here, the John Oliver Show did an expose or a story, and we've HSLDA featured prominently. And the whole point of it was that homeschoolers need more regulation. So the boundaries of freedom are pretty good right now. Right. Sure about that. Oh, I think I said Siri. Sorry, we can cut this part. Um, so the boundaries of freedom are all moving in the right direction, but the lofty heights of popular culture are starting to put more scrutiny on homeschooling.
And what would you say is the appropriate way for homeschoolers to respond to this? Is this going to end up back in the courts again? Is it going to be the court of public opinion? Or is this going to have to be policy advocacy at the state level? Or is this going to even involve the federal level, in your opinion?
So the state level is always vital because that's where laws affecting education begin. And so Homeschool Legal Defense has, we work with a huge network of state and local organizations who are watching out in state legislatures constantly. But I think that the biggest thing right now is um, in the court of public opinion, because that's where, you know, these things that I just mentioned, they're telling their story in a really different way, in a popular culture way, from in a well produced and well written way. They're telling their side of the story, and they're giving us our due. Like we did a good job in moving back the barriers, but now we need to kind of rein in these kind of rascals. So, what we as liberty minded people need to always be aware of is people respond to stories better than data. And our stories are often told through folks like you, who were homeschooled themselves. One of the things that I do a little bit is homeschool organizations will often have a state capital day. You have one famously in Idaho, and they actually call it Apple Pie Day, and that's where Caleb's from. In case we didn't set that, um, and so the homeschool in Idaho, they host this Capitol Day. They have a rally. Lots of families come, and then they deliver a piece of homemade apple pie to their state legislators. And that's probably the single most effective advocacy tool that we have, because when you meet a family and their children and they're there just to introduce themselves and say, we homeschool, we appreciate what you do, we don't need anything, we don't want anything, just, you know, um, but that's super effective. And so the kind of things we need to do is continue to tell our stories in an effective way, much as the critics are telling their stories in a super effective way now.
Yeah, and that story in Idaho for sure has definitely been compelling. I had the opportunity to participate in a few Pi Days myself, and when I interned at the state legislature, the amount of respect for the homeschool community and appreciation, especially around Pi Day, everyone loves those pies, and it's definitely the highlight of the legislative session. I think really does speak a lot to the legislators and helps to, like you said, shape the not only the public opinion but also the policy of the state. One of the things that is really central to the idea of homeschooling and education freedom is the idea of parental rights. And you've not only been an advocate for homeschooling, but also have litigated in homeschooling issues. Where parental rights is currently based in a substantive due process theory, do you think that that's sustainable long term for protecting the freedom to homeschool? And if not, what direction do you think that the law should go in ensuring that there's adequate protections for homeschooling individuals in the law?
Yeah, so you're talking about the constitutional right of parents to direct the education of their children, and you're right. The roots of that are found in one of the early substantive due process cases called Pierce v. Society of Sisters out of my home state of Oregon. Um, and, that was, like I say, one of the early cases, and substantive due process as a legal theory has kind of come under a lot of scrutiny, especially from more conservative justices on the Supreme Court. Um, but so homeschooling does depend, the right to homeschool does depend on the right of parents to direct the education of their children. But there are other ways to get there than substantive due process. So, um, one of the traditional historical rights that have always existed in America has been a strong that parents and the relationship between parents and children should not be intruded upon unduly by state government. So there are people writing law review articles right now addressing that. Our founder, Mike Ferris, is actually working on a law review article. I've seen the first draft of it in answering that very question with an affirmative answer that there are other ways to affirm the fundamental right of parents. And this is something that, this always comes up. Critics always say that people like me believe that parents have an absolute right. And, that's just not true. We understand that the state has the ability to intervene in abusive situations, and, we support that. But the distinction between an absolute right and a fundamental right is a fundamental right the state should kind of leave its hands off unless there's a really good reason to get involved. And then when it does, it should only do it in a very narrowly tailored way. So, yeah, there are other legal theories for why the right of parents to direct their education of children is a fundamental right.
And do you think that the process of examining whether it's substantive due process or maybe shifting to more of this focus that others are exploring, do you think that that will occur through litigation or what do you think the process is moving forward for that?
Well, so the story of homeschool freedom in America has mostly been a lot a lot more in the trenches. Um, you know, North Dakota is a great example. Um, our outfit took, I think, 8 cases to the Supreme Court where people were being prosecuted and lost 7 of the 8. They won number 8 on a technicality. What freed up homeschooling in North Dakota was not a court case. It was um, homeschoolers staying stalwart, sticking with it um, year after year, going to the legislature until finally, this may be apocryphal, but what I've heard is that the Supreme Court finally just got tired of it and kind of, sub rosa told the legislature, you guys got to fix this because we don't want to do any more of these cases. So the legislature, passed a statute that permitted homeschooling. So that's where the most um, work has been successful in the 50 state solution.
I love that phrase that you used earlier, in the trenches. For those who are interested in getting involved in advocacy, both we can talk about law students and those who aren't in the legal career or in any sort of legal capacity. What are ways that homeschool families and others interested in preserving parental rights and homeschool freedom can get involved in preserving that in their states?
Well, if you're homeschooling yourself, check out your state's homeschool organization because they're the guys with they're the boots on the ground. They're the guys with relationships with the legislature, individual legislators. They're the ones that organize the apple pie days in Boise, and they're sort of the boots on the ground. We're sort of HSLDA is sort of like the Air Corps. We come in and provide air cover uh, a lot of times, but um, you know if you're homeschooling your kids, really um, keep in mind that there's a bigger mission and cause for why you're doing that. Be involved in your local group, be involved in your state group, and if you'd like to, you can be involved in my organization too by visiting our website at hslda.org. There's lots of ways there you can learn things, or you can team up with us in our work as well.
And how would you recommend for law students and legal practitioners in their states? Is there ways that they can be involved in helping in the practice of law to help homeschooling families?
So we are a small boutique law firm in Northern Virginia with 50 state. We work in all 50 states, but we cannot do our work without local attorneys. So we have a network of local attorneys that when we need to appear in court, we have to partner with them. We always prefer to partner with somebody who understands us, oftentimes homeschool themselves. We're a Christian organization. We often represent Christian homeschoolers. And so, having the like-minded, but we also need people who understand their own state's judicial system. And there's just a lot of nitty-gritty stuff that the guy whose office is in the town where the courthouse is so much better, and we can come in and partner with them. So all over the country, we have a network of guys that guys and gals that we call on when a case arises in their state.
And central to this whole discussion and your career and opportunity to advocate for homeschooling has been your legal career and your legal education. What would be your advice for someone? Well, that's two things here for those who are in law school who want to be involved, and also those who just maybe don't really feel called to the homeschooling fight, but feel called to, like you mentioned, the broader liberty-minded fight. What would be your advice to the law student? And then what would be your advice to someone who's considering law school? What to look for in a law school? What to do to prepare themselves for a legal career?
Well, so I tell people I came to Regent University School of Law because I knew I wanted to get involved in this particular cause. And Regent University it prepared me extremely well for what the calling that I felt on my life from the Lord. And so if you're thinking about getting into something like this, you know, learning the law from a Christian perspective, being well grounded in your own ideological underpinnings, your own Christian faith is really important. But if you want to be a Supreme Court justice, you pretty much got to go to Harvard or Yale. I mean, maybe Notre Dame, right? Um, so it really kind of matters what your ambitions are. But I tell kids all the time that if your ambition is to go back to your hometown, hang up a shingle, and practice law, support your family, a school like Regent is absolutely wonderful. Your state law school is probably pretty good too. Lots of options. If you want to get into the cause, coming to something like Regent is really a good starting point. And then out there, there's lots and lots of organizations doing good work in the Liberty area all over the country, really. And I, have been blessed to get to know a lot of them, and sometimes we work together with them on issues. So lots of opportunities for kids thinking about law school.
Certainly. Well, it's wonderful to have you back here at Regent University School of Law. Appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat a little bit about what you do. I appreciate the work that you do at HSLDA. Could you maybe leave our audience a little bit just with a few last words on how they can, again, get involved with HSLDA and what they can do, how to reach out to you and your organization to get involved?
Sure. Homeschool Legal Defense Association is a nonprofit public interest law firm based in Northern Virginia. We are membership and donor supported. If you'd like to support our cause through either method, you can join at hslda.org/join. And if you'd like to donate, tax deductible donation, You can do that at hslda.org/donate. You guys can figure that all out. We'd really appreciate your support. We really believe in the cause, and we can't do it without supporters like you.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of the Regent University School of Law podcast with HSLDA President Jim Mason. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.